Hello, a good night of Shabbos. This week's Parshas is Parshas Shlach, and Shabbos is going to be Chof Ches Sivan, the day the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin arrived safely in America during World War II in 1941. And this upcoming Thursday is Gimel Tammuz, the Yom HaIlula, the day of the passing of the Rebbe, Gimel Tammuz, Tavshin and Daled. So we have to speak about the connection of the Parsha and what lessons we derive, especially in relation to Chof Ches Sivan and for Gimel Tammuz. We're going to start with the prayer as usual, but this is something we say 4 times a day. It's part of the Krishma. We say it twice in the morning. We say it b'Ma'ariv. And we say it by Kif Shalamita. We say it once in the morning, actually. The third Parsha of Shema, which contains the Parsha of Tzitzit, and the Pasuk says, "V'hoya lechem l'tzitzis, you should v'hoya lechem l'tzitzis, orisa moisoi, v'schartem es kol mitzvos Hashem, v'asisa moisom, v'loisa suru achrei levavchem, v'achrei nechem, asheratem zoinim achareyem." So, what the verse means is, you should have tzitzis for you. You shall see it, you shall remember all the commandments of Hashem and perform them, and you shall not spy after your heart and after your eyes, after which you stray. So, this week's Parsha has the mitzvah of tzitzis, and the mitzvah of tzitzis is one of the general commandments. We've spoken about it once, but today we'll speak about it a bit differently, and emphasize different points. So, there are many mitzvahs where we say, Shkula kol haTorah keneged tefillin. It says about Shabbos. It says Gdeilut Tzedakah shekamereves segula, shekamereves segula. Tzedakah is the greatest mitzvah. Tefillin is the greatest mitzvah. Milah is the greatest mitzvah. Sasa neichel imrasecha goes on Milah because it's 24/7 in the person. So there's Milah, there's Shabbos, there's Tefillin, there's Tzedakah. One of the mitzvahs, or let's say paraduma, we say Zay Chukas HaTorah. So there's certain mitzvahs that concerning those mitzvahs we say they contain the entire Torah in a certain sense. There's a certain aspect. In other words, how can we say that every single mitzvah, how can we say about certain mitzvahs that contains the whole Torah if we said that already about one mitzvah? So how can we have 10 mitzvahs that we say that each one of these mitzvahs encapsulates the entire Torah? And the answer is that each one bring out some general, fundamental, basic point and aspect of Judaism where it's more evident in this mitzvah than in any other mitzvah. So we're saying over here about tzitzis, that Orisa Moisa, you should see the tzitzis, and then, Uschartem es kol mitzvos Hashem, you remember all the mitzvahs. And as Rashi brings down, everyone knows that the minyan gematria shel tzitzis, the numerical value of the Hebrew letters of tzitzis, is sheish meyos. 90 plus 10 twice is 100, is 200 plus tov is 400. Ushmeina chutin, and 8 threads, and chamisha ksharim, and 5 knots, equals 13. So when we look at the tzitzis, we'll remind ourselves of the 613 commandments. That's what Rashi says, and that's why, on a simple level, when we look at the tzitzit, we remind ourselves of all the mitzvahs. But there must be something deeper, obviously, an inner significance, some sort of theme. So, this is what we spoke about once before. One second, before we get to that, there's a medrash. What I'm going to speak today is primarily from a talk of the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos Chelik Beis. So, there's a medrash which says the following, that Moshe said to Hashem, what's the point of giving the Jews a law, a Torah, since they find themselves in a physical world, so they might lose their way. They're going to be in a world of temptations, and they might lose their way. So on this, Hashem said, he answered Moshe, I'm going to give them tzitzis. So in a way, tzitzis is like the antidote for life. In Golus, in the year 2023, when we're facing temptations and challenges, What was the antidote? What was the weapon Hashem gave us to be able to keep us strong and retain our integrity and our loyalty to the code? The mitzvah of tzitzis. Now, before we get into what I really want to speak about, as a side point, many of the commentators bring out straight away on the words over here where it says, "V'lo yisosuru achei levavchem v'achenechem," you shouldn't stray after your eyes and your heart. They bring down what the beginning of the parsha and the end of the parsha are connected. Because in the beginning of the parsha, the spies, they went losur esaretz yisuru. They were spying, and we use that word losur, which is connected to spying, similar to over here. So the beginning is wedged into the end is connected to the beginning. That there's two ways of seeing. Sometimes you see something, you have a negative perspective, or you allow your eyes to look where they shouldn't. And as Rashi brings down over here, that halev, and the Rashi actually brings straight away this connection on the words kimoi mitura oretz. The word susura is similar to mitur, which is spying out the land. And he says, halev v'einayim hemeraglim l'guf. The heart and the eyes are spies for the body. So he's using the word meraglim, which is used throughout the whole parsha. And they are the mesarserim lo yashaveres, ha'ayin royeh, the eye sees, halev chomer, the heart desires, v'aguf oisas avera, and the body commits the sin. So here we see straight away another dimension and a connection of tzitzis that many people in general today, everyone's talking about the disaster of internet and the devices, and there's all these movements and organizations about guarding your eyes, and Svarim are talking about it, and it's all very, very important, and we cannot ever underestimate the damage that could be done. But nevertheless, I don't think I've heard too many people speaking just about this idea alone, that tzitzis itself could prevent the person. In other words, start with what the Torah itself says, that wear tzitzis. You have no idea the power of tzitzis in this regard. So much so that the Pasuk itself speaks about it. So right now, and by the way, this is a very big talk, very currently, about the destruction that has come through social media. I think just recently the Surgeon General of the United States of America said that social media has robbed children of the innocence of the childhood. And the studies have gone about teenage suicide and all that. And according to the studies, one of the major factors is what the eyes see. When a child looks on the internet, on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever it's called, and he sees what other people have, and he's jealous and he becomes depressed, and this has brought an increase in depression amongst teenagers like never before, the percentage, and also to actual suicide. Hashem Yirachem. So, right now is more relevant than ever. Therefore, we should also stress that Hashem in the Torah already prescribed an antidote, tzitzis. So one level of the antidote is because he says, tzitzis, or isa moise, looking at your tzitzis, reminds you of all the mitzvahs, and that will help you in the v'lo suru achei levavchem v'achenechem. So there's looking at tzitzis which are positive looking, and that will prevent you from not looking at something negative. Now, let's talk about what is the significance of tzitzis, and how is it that it also represents all the Torah mitzvahs. So, we once spoke about it, and we quoted the famous mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek in Derech Tzeisecho. And over there he explains that tzitzis has the talis, according to Kabbalah, there's the talis Godel, which you make the bracha on Le'esatev B'tzitzis. And then there's the big garment. And then there's the tzitzis, the fringes. And according to Kabbalah, and Chassidus, the talus represents a Oir Makif. That's the infinite light. Like the Oir Ein Sof Shelifnei Tzimtzum, the infinite light which comes before the contraction. God as God is, in relation to himself. Then there's the Tzimtzum, the contraction, and then there's the Tzitzis, and the Tzitzis is compared to the Oir HaKav. Oir Kav Kotza, which means a minute, specific line, a laser beam. So we have the size. Think of a talus gadol, and how much smaller the Oir HaKav is in relation to the talus gadol. And in the mitzvah, we wrap ourselves. The mitzvah is lis'atif. You have to wrap yourself, surround yourself, become enveloped in the talus gadol. So that represents the Igul HaGadol, which is called the Great Circle. That's the great infinite light, as God is. Not as he lowers himself, not as he contracts himself. But then there's the Tzimtzum, and then there's the Oir HaKav. God makes space, Kaviyachol, for the world. And then the light becomes more particular, specific, relative to each creation in its measure. So now, this is the significance of the mitzvah of tzitzis. In every single mitzvah, first I'll tell you the way I once spoke about it, then I'll add a new point to it now, today. We've spoken already many times that Judaism consists of two themes that run through everything. Bittul and Yichud and Zichur. Yichud and Zichur go together. There's one dimension where we have to totally nullify ourselves, surrender, yield to something which is greater, to a supreme authority, a supreme power, a higher authority, to something incomparably greater than ourselves. That's Nase Koidim Lin Nishma. First thing we'll do, we say Hineni. We pledge allegiance. That's all bittul. And that's as meant to be. Because the first thing you have to realize when we're in a relationship with Hashem, we have to realize that Hashem is totally infinite. And the greatest bridge that could exist in distance between two things is the finite and the infinite. So the only way that we can become close to the infinite is by Him allowing it. That means it has to be on His terms. As we've spoken about this many times. That's the bittul aspect. But then, that's not enough. Hashem wanted we should be united. Not only to surrender, but we should remain, so to speak, in a way, in existence. And that existence itself should enjoy it, should understand. In other words, there's not only a mitzvah of, let's say, faith in God, which supersedes logic, where we have to put our logic aside, so to speak, deposit your logic by the door, all ye who enter here. But on the other hand, no! There's a mitzvah, understand, learn, no. So now, no other mitzvah shows these two themes in Yiddishkeit as the mitzvah of tzitzis, which physically demonstrates, reflects, and signifies this idea. We have a physical talus gadol, the surrounding light, which represents His infinity, which could also be Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And we have the tzitzis, the light, which is finite, very finite, and proportionate and measured, the Oir HaKav. And that teaches us, and this is why mitzvahs tzitzis is shkulik and kol mitzvahs, because by looking at the tzitzis, seeing that Oir HaMakif and seeing that Oir HaKav, you realize you have these two dimensions in your service of God. Now there's another couple of sikhs where the Rebbe doesn't talk about this idea in the words of bittul and yichud, but there's some places where the Rebbe uses a different terms, which I find fascinating, which is in Judaism, there's Gidrei HaNoisen, the Gidrei HaMakabel. There's the parameter of the giver, that's Hashem, and there's the parameter of the receiver, that's us. Like for example, let's say in a relationship. It's obvious that in a relationship, there's two people that are having a relationship, so there's certain aspects of the relationship that are according to one side, or let's say the mashpia, Gidrei HaNoisen, Gidrei HaMashpia, and then there's certain aspects that are Gidrei HaMakabel. So let's say we're talking about we have a relationship with Hashem. Hashem has a relationship with us. How do we meet? Is because Judaism, at the very outset, in the beginning, has aspects in Judaism where Hashem, as Hashem is, in all his infinity, is present and involved and invested. Because if it wasn't God in his infinity, then we're not dealing with God as God is. We're dealing with some cardboard God, paper God, not the real God. The whole idea of Yiddishkeit is that we are connected with his very essence. As we've spoken many times, Yisrael Ereisem Kuchuvrichu Kulachad. So there has to be one aspect of Judaism, of Yiddishkeit, which is Gidrei Hanesen. But if it's a true relationship, there has to be elements of Yiddishkeit, which is according to the Gidrei Hamakabel. We're dealing with humans, made of flesh and blood, with their limitations. And what's the ultimate? That it becomes one. God as God is, becomes united with human beings made of a body of flesh and blood. So now let's go back to Tzitzit. In Tzitzit we see the aspect of Gidrei Makabel, that's the talus. Sorry, Gidrei Anoisen, that's the talus. And we have the Gidrei Makabel, that's the Tzitzit. We look at the talus and the Tzitzit, and we see immediately how all of Judaism, everything, contains elements of both these sides of the relationship. There was a certain aspect of the relationship that brings out the idea of infinity, transcendence, call it yielding, call it surrender, and then there's certain aspects of Yiddishkeit in every single thing, which bring out enjoyment, unification, understanding, feelings, etc. Now, we're going to go to the Sikh and Chili Beis. So the Rebbe has a very big klotz kasha. Take a pause of what we just said till now. But once, based on what we said till now, we'll understand. If it says in the Torah that Risa Moise, look at your tzitzis, and the tzitzis is Bigamatria 613, the numerical value, so Hashem could have taken tzitzis and told us, wear it as a necklace. Why do you need to tell us God before? We'll have the 613 mitzvahs, we'll wear tzitzis, we'll have some necklace made out of tzitzis, and we'll look at those tzitzis, and it'll equal 613. It'll remind us of all the mitzvahs. But the answer is based on what we said before, but now we'll translate it more practically in a certain sense. If that would have been the case, it's no mitzvah, and it wouldn't remember us, it wouldn't cause us to remember mitzvahs. Because what is a mitzvah? Now let's go back to the mitzvah of tzitzis. That means there's the element of the mitzvah of tzitzis, which is transcendental, beyond human logic, something that reflects God himself, and then there's the strand which comes down into understanding. But if we would just look at the tzitzis and say, what is there to tzitzis? Only the fact that we can understand it and relate to it, then it's not a mitzvah at all. That's not what mitzvahs are. As we spoke recently about the mitzvah of kashrus, we gave an example. What is kashrus? Good for your health, good for your soul. Something that revolutionizes, causes something in the whole cosmic reality of all the godly levels. And we say they all missed the point. What is a mitzvah? Ratzon Hashem. Hu Ratzoni Echad. The mitzvah is Hashem himself. That's what a mitzvah is. Now the same thing is over here. It's a very deep concept and very profound. We have to realize Yiddishkeit is built on our relationship. This is the first step. That's why the bittul comes first. The Gidrei Hanoisen comes first. Because that's what makes Judaism totally different. Is that every single mitzvah, the origin of the mitzvah is in somewhere, someplace, in a level which is absolute infinity. Which is beyond logic. It's something which is God himself. And just like we don't even know what a soul is in its entirety, could someone now speak about what is God? The highest thing we could say about God is that he's loy machshvei sai, machshvei sechem. Our thoughts are not his thoughts. He's not a being which can be defined. And that is the highest praise. It's the absolute perfection. And automatically everything good is contained in it. The same thing is true with mitzvahs. every single mitzvah starts from a level which is Ratzon Hashem, pure will of Hashem, which transcends definition, transcends logic, and and even transcends qualities that we can speak of. And that's what it means that the tzitzis is connected to a talis. We have to know that this is the truth of all the mitzvahs. Uschartem is kol mitzvahs Hashem. Every mitzvah starts from a talis godel, from a level of godliness which is totally infinity. Now, there's a famous saying of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which brings out this concept, and that is the Frierdiker Rebbe said in Yiddish, "Shenish wie de Welt meint, halleweil wollen wir keinem gewinnen Chukim, mit derselben Geschmack wie Mishpatim. Nein, halleweil wollen wir keinem gewinnen Mishpatim, mit derselben Kabbalah Seil wie Chukim." Which means, it's not like the world thinks, halleweil, we would perform the mitzvahs that we don't understand, like the mitzvahs that are called chukim, decrees, edicts. Those are the mitzvahs that we don't understand, that we're not given a reason for it. Like tumah and tara, things that are otherworldly. So it's not like some people think, halavai, if only I would perform the mitzvahs of chukim with the same enjoyment that I perform the mitzvahs of mishpatim. Those are the civil laws, social laws, which I appreciate because I understand them. No, the opposite is true. Halavai, I perform the mitzvahs of mishpatim, the mitzvahs that make sense and therefore I enjoy. Halavai, Mekayim, those mitzvahs, the same way as Mekayim chukim, with the Kabbalah say, with the subservience that I have, the obedience that I have when I perform the chukim. But what is the real deep meaning of this saying? Not only because the basis is that we have to realize we are subjects to a king, and that's it. You know, you're makabel el malchus shamayim. But there's another point. It's not only an avodah vort. It's not only a statement about how we're meant to serve Hashem. It's a havana vort. It's something that tells us about the origin of all mitzvahs. The Genesis is in a place, all mitzvahs are in a place which is Hashem Himself. Who were tzonei echad. And lo machshavosai machshavosechem. And that's the greatest virtue and value of mitzvahs. And therefore we have to also understand, this changes the whole perspective when we have all those svarim that talk about taimei mitzvahs, the reasons for mitzvahs. It's all very nice. Because Hashem wanted us to have a geschmack, a certain enjoyment of mitzvahs. So therefore He said, you know what, there's some mitzvahs, I'll tell you the reasons for it, also because that'll show more this aspect of yichud, becoming united with Hashem, and also, like we said before, there's some mitzvahs that bring out more the gidrei hamakabel dimension, the human element, the created beings element, so to speak. And then there's other mitzvahs that bring out more direct. In other words, a mitzvah that came to us with no reason, that's God's will in its pure form. Undistilled, unfiltered, without a costume, without a uniform, just God in His nakedness, so to speak, in its purity. The Eibishter wanted us also to appreciate some mitzvahs, so He put on a costume, He added some flavoring to some mitzvahs that we should appreciate also on a human level, so to speak. But really we have to understand that every mitzvah starts in the same place. That is what a mitzvah is. Now we come to another point. Getting back to what Moshe asked Hashem. How are we going to be able to survive the trials, tribulations, and temptations of a modern world, of a city life? And Hashem gave us tzitzis. Number one, when we look at the tzitzis, we remind ourselves of all the mitzvahs, but also because in the Parsha of tzitzis, what does He say? Right after that it says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher yitzesi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim le'is lechem Elokim Ani Hashem Elokeichem. This pasuk, which declares how Hashem took us out of Egypt, follows immediately after He commands us to do the tzitzis. Why? Because it's the same theme. Our performing mitzvahs means, even as a mitzvah comes down and has some sort of logic or enjoyment, and there's a tzitzis element, but we know really that it's all something that starts from infinity Himself, then Hashem will perform as He did in the beginning of the creation of the nation. He took us out of Egypt, and He performed all those miracles that were supernatural. And that's the whole idea of going out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means limitations. The Jew connected to Hashem and living his lifestyle is one which transcends nature. And that's why in this Sikh and Chili Beis, very interestingly, The Rebbe says, if we look at the way a Jew is supposed to live his life, keep Shabbos. But what do you mean? He could say he makes the most money on Shabbos. He says the competition is open on Shabbos. How am I going to earn a living if we're not evening the field, the playing field? And then every single day, first I have to get up, I have to daven, and then I'm meant to learn after davening. So again, my competition could open his store at 6:30 a.m., and I can't even get there till 8:30 a.m. And you can go on and on. How are we supposed to be healthy? We circumcise ourselves, we damage ourselves, we cut ourselves. And why should we have good marriages? We have to have certain times where we separate ourselves. Let's say, for example, all these sort of questions, which someone would say that logic really would argue the opposite. So this is what you have to know. Not everything's going to fit perfectly, logically. But what you have to remember is that the whole idea of dealing with a God, with Hashem, is something which is totally infinite and makes miracles. And that's, in a way, in a certain sense, how we relate to Hashem. We have to see every mitzvah as something which starts in something which is infinite, and we have to realize that the beginning of the Jewish nation is Mitzrayim. L'man tiskes yom Mitzrayim. Kol yemei chayecha. Every day for a Jew in the year of 2023 in Miami or in New York or in London or in Melbourne to be a Yid which is following Torah mitzvahs is in a way being in the world and higher in the world at the same time, which means he has to be connected to some special power. Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher tzisei eschem eretz Mitzrayim. The same idea like then he took us out of Mitzrayim, today he gives us the power to transcend whatever trials, tribulations, internet dangers, social media, whatever the world and the tornadoes is going on in the world, we can transcend it. So on a personal note, I see the time is very late. I'll just finish with 2 personal anecdotes that happened to myself, and then 2 stories connected to Talis and Tzitzit. This week was my birthday on Sunday. I usually don't talk about myself. I'm a bit uncomfortable. But since the Rebbe said that one of the customs of the birthday is to talk about his history and his relationship with tzaddikim and memories, so my birthday is Chav Beis Sivan, and it falls out many years in Parshas Shlach. And by the way, I was born in Parshas Shlach, and this I want to say, so use this opportunity with something which I mentioned once before. The Frierdiker Rebbe says in a Sikha that the Parsha you were born in is merumiz your entire life. So most people, the secular world, they talk about the Parsha when they were bar mitzvah. Their bar mitzvah Parsha. But the truth is, the bar mitzvah parsha, I don't know if it has any significance. So sometimes your bar mitzvah parsha could be weeks after you had your Yom Haledes, your birthday, for whatever reason. What happens if it falls out in the middle of Pesach? You couldn't make an arrangement that day. What happens if the shul where you wanted a lane had everything booked for many weeks? Whatever. There could be many reasons why your bar mitzvah parsha is not actually the week of your birthday. But the parsha you're born, I'm quoting you a talk of the previous Rebbe. He said the parsha you were born in is the parsha where your entire life is alluded to. So I was born in Parshas Shlach, and I'll tell you 2 stories about me. I'm not going to give you the whole theatrics and drama. I'll just tell you that when I was a child, around 10, 11, in general, as a child, you could say I was an accident-prone child. I had a lot of accidents. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know, I would say from the age of between 3 and 10. I had a lot of accidents. Anyways, but there was one accident, this was like the last one. I was riding a bicycle very, very fast, and the bicycle stopped full brake while it was middle of pedaling full speed. I flew off the bicycle, I landed on my chin, and it was like a very scary accident. And I broke a couple of my teeth, I had to go to a specialist. Anyways, I don't know if this was my stepfather or my mother, probably called Rabbi Chanukov or the Maskiris and told the Rebbe what happened. And I imagine that she told the Rebbe also, in general, that I had a lot of accidents. So the answer from the Rebbe was to check his tzitzis. So that's one story that happened. And the Rebbe said, check his tzitzis. And I don't think it's such a big surprise that a child, 10-year-old, might have tzitzis as possible. You know, who's careful with the children's tzitzis? Kids getting, running around all day long, getting in different entanglements. Okay, that's one story. But then when I was 20 years old, I wrote a long letter to the Rebbe, bearing my soul about my life and everything. And the Rebbe answered, in all of the above, speak to your mashpia. And he wrote, Bedikas tefillin v'talis cotton kosher. You should check your tefillin and you should check your talis cotton. Now that already was, the first story is already interesting. But the second story is really especially interesting. I can't say I'm the only one. I know of a couple other instances where the Rebbe told someone to check his talis cotton, but it's not usual. It's not so common. So here we have two stories where the Rebbe answered me to check my tzitzis, and it seems that tzitzis is also a shmira. It guards a person in addition to spiritual guarding, as we see from the pasuk, but it also has a physical guarding element. If you're going on a trip, buy a new pair of tzitzis to make sure they're beautiful and kosher and everything, if you have a doubt. So now I just want to say another two stories. One is from the Gemara. It's a famous story. I'll just say it very, very quickly, and you look it up yourself. That's a famous Gemara in Menachos, Taf Mem Dalet Omen Aleph, where there was a certain Jew who was very careful with his tzitzis, and he heard of a very beautiful, beautiful, attractive woman that was somewhere, and he decided to go there and sin with her. And as he was getting undressed, his tzitzis slapped him in the face. That's what the Gemara says. So it was his scrupulousness in tzitzis that prevented him from sinning. And the end of the story is that this woman herself, who saw what happened with her own eyes, that the tzitzis slapped this person in the face who was a disciple, who was a student of a great tzaddik, and he just didn't do the Aveira. Right then and there he was stopped in his tracks, and she was so curious to find out, about this person. Like, I think she told him, if I remember correctly, you don't find me attractive? He said, no, God forbid, etc. And she wanted to find out about him. Where do you come from? Who was your teacher? And the end of the story is that she, I think, converted and went to his teacher. And I think in the end they got married. But this is all because of the power of tzitzis that prevented this person from committing a sin. Then there's another story. Again, these stories have to be looked up to get to all the details. We're way over time over here today. There's a story of the previous Rebbe and his father. His father once sent him to go nullify a decree. There was a certain Russian minister, I think he was Jewish, and he was producing a manifesto with all the crimes of the traditional Jews, and he was just putting his finishing touches, and he was going to present it to the government, and this was going to bring catastrophic results for all the Yidden. So the Frierdiker Rebbe sent his son, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, sent his son, the sixth, who was going to become the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, on a mission to go to Leningrad. So he went from Lubavitch to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, and the Frierdiker Rebbe tried, and it didn't help. No, he didn't see a way around it. He came back failed. And he told, I don't know if he told his father or just he came back. He came back to Lubavitch and he walked into his father, and his father, he must have told his father, I think. I imagine his father understood. In any case, the father was holding the talis on his shoulder and checking his tzitzis, the fringes. That's the custom. Before you start davening, you have the talis over your shoulder and you check the tzitzis that it's kosher. So the Rebbe Rashab turned to the Frierdiker Rebbe and he told him that there was once a story that the Alter Rebbe sent his son, the Mittel Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, sent his son, the Mittel Rebbe, on a mission to also nullify a decree. And the Alter Rebbe was doing what the Rebbe Rashab was doing. He had his talis over his shoulder, and he told his son, the Mittel Rebbe, that the talis is a makif, which is the infinite light, a very powerful light. And what it says about that the makif mesama einei Rishoyim, I forgot the Lashon, that the makif blinds the light of the klippot, of the evil, because it's so powerful. It's a blinding light of holiness. that's what he told his son. And the Mittel Rebbe, I think grabbed the tzitzis and then went to do what he had to do. I think the Mittel Rebbe did. But in any case, the Frierdiker Rebbe heard what his father told him, that the talis is makif, the infinite light. And while the Rashab was looking at tzitzis, the Frierdiker Rebbe grabbed the tzitzis, kissed it, and then turned it around and went right back to Leningrad. And the end of the story is, he decided to just knock on the door of this major troublemaker who was writing the whole manifesto. He decided to confront it head on. What did he do? He knocked on his door and he started saying, what's the story? You know, what do you have against the Jews? He says, I'm going to finish you off, all of the Jews like you, and it's prepared. I have written up everything. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, yeah, let me see what you wrote. I'll show you. And he brings out his thing, which is pages and pages and pages and pages. And the Frierdiker Rebbe just takes it for a second, looks at it for a second, and then proceeds to rip it page by page in front of the person. He ripped it. Pages and pages, the whole manifesto. And that guy flew into murderous rage. And if I remember correctly, he punched the Frierdiker Rebbe. But the Frierdiker Rebbe had accomplished what he was meant to set out to accomplish. After he destroyed this whole file, the file was destroyed. That person became so ill because the work of I don't know how many years that he put in to be able to destroy the Jews and the Jewish way of life had come to naught. He couldn't rewrite it. It was destroyed, ripped to shreds. And I think he passed away, this person, shortly afterwards. But the point from the story is that it's actually the power of the talis and the tzitzis that reinvigorated and galvanized the Frierdiker Rebbe and gave him the strength to walk straight into the den of the lion with courage and mesiras nefesh and just do such a thing that destroyed it, a bomb in central headquarters of the opposition that destroyed it once and for all. And this is the connection to Chav Chesiven and to Gimel Tammuz. The Rebbe comes to America. At that time, America was called the Treif Medina. It was the Treif, the non-kosher country, because all of the people from the old school, from pre-World War II, my mother who came from Minkach, the old country, they were terrified of this modern, secularized city life, when they had a life of wholesomeness and innocence and more simple, etc. And this was the Rebbe's shlichus, coming dafka to America in such a place, and then transforming it with the power of tzitzis, talis, tefillin, and all those things, which is bolstering mitzvahs more and more and more, that little by little, the bit of light, the light of the makif, the light of mitzvahs, the light of the Hashem's infinity, transforms and makes over America. It makes it into a dira b'tachtenim, a dwelling place for Hashem. And if we will do our part and constantly working to make this world a dira b'tachtenim, Hashem will do His part and bring the ultimate geula. Take it from a yad mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.